you?
Doing good.
Good.
Becky's here too.
Yeah, Becky made
Hi,
it.
Becky.
I was told I can film
I'm
public
coming straight
meetings.
from Valley Fair.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So I'm like, please
Yes.
take me seriously.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. I'm just live streaming. We have a pretty large Facebook group, so a lot of people can't make it tonight. So yeah, figured it was easier to disseminate information that way.
Not far out of the circle, but it's north. It's north of Mono. Probably right in there. It's not very far away. The landing where the companies are. Just says representatives that are attending this. This is just 4 weeks of the 2 months. This general counsel.
We'll start a little bit early and call order to the council's listening session. Listening session, I remind folks, is for members of the public and staff to talk to items not on tonight's council agenda. I understand we have some folks here who want to talk about Gopher resources. Thank you, Siri, be quiet. And we can do that. I do want to suggest that we have an officer being sworn in downstairs at 6:30. I suspect that officer probably has family members and others there for the meeting, so we have a hard stop at 6:30. So with that,
Okay, that's the first one. So Mayor, I sent you a video of the Q&A session that we had with MCPA and the Minnesota Department of Health.
yeah,
It was from.
I don't recall having that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I sent it to you. I can resend it to you. I just want to know if you and the council members can watch that video because, I think it's an important part of your responsibility to hear.
Yeah, we had staff at the meeting and we've gotten a briefing back from that staff.
Okay.
And the staff reports that the meeting went well. There were a number of questions asked and answered. What each council member does with their own time and what they view or choose not to view is up to
Sure.
them.
No, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's just important because there's, 100 or people there, and people got up one after another and were just telling their stories, and people were requesting. So just to hear from the people of Burr Oaks and the surrounding area. So I would encourage you all to watch that because I feel like you can really hear the stories from that.
And Subpoena and Hanson were actually at the meeting there.
Oh, awesome. Great. All right. I'm really glad to hear that. So there were a number of requests there. A few of them were, more monitors at the site, real-time monitoring, and just more timely alerts because we're hearing about this 3 months after the fact. We can't do anything with that information. Mm-hmm. And so we're pressuring MCPA to do that. Thank you, MPCA. And at the last listening session, you were talking about how you're doing soil tests, and you are also pressuring PCA yourself to do more. But
we were passing along questions and encouraging them to be open and transparent with all information.
But
my understanding is that's exactly what they did and have done.
I just want to know, what addition, beyond soil tests, beyond pressuring them, what else is the council and the mayor going to do to protect us, to give us the tools that we need to protect ourselves, and to hold Gopher Resource responsible?
Well, I'll let other council members speak for themselves. From my perspective, at this point, to be clear, the agency to hold Gopher Resources, quote unquote, responsible or accountable is the MPCA. They are the regulator. They monitor air quality emissions. They report air quality emissions to the community when appropriate, I guess, and to to Gopher Resources. When there's an enforcement action required, they communicate that as well to Gopher Resources, and that's a communication that happens between Gopher Resources and the NPCA. We were looped in, and we're happy to play a supportive role in terms of getting information out there. But from the city's perspective, our response to NPCA suggesting that there had been a potential threat, a public health threat, was to investigate whether or not that potential, the emissions, had consequence that warranted action. We looked at our water quality testing, looked into, from our Public Works Department, whether or not we should retest or test specifically the water quality in the area. It was determined that the water quality and the water supply is removed enough and protected enough from ground soil contaminants that we did not move forward on any additional testing for the water supply, because we're fairly assured that the security of the water supply is not in question from the threat presented. We went out and then did a series of tests on public parks in the area, much like the MPCA suggested that you all submit soil tests and test your property for ground lead that had fallen as a result of the emission. Those results came back last week. My understanding is that we took roughly, I don't know, Diane, 18 samples from 3 different parks, is that right?
At each site.
At each, okay, 18 samples at each site. The results came back, as I understand it, well below EPA threshold concerns and or CDC's concerns for public health, is that correct? At this point, as far as we understand, we've been made aware of a potential threat. We have followed up to evaluate whether or not that threat has had consequences that warrant or justify additional action. The results we've gotten on the soil testing, to my mind, although I haven't talked to my colleagues on the council, do not warrant additional action. My understanding is furthermore that of the soil tests that were processed by MPCA, in the neighborhood of 90% or more came back within, again, acceptable levels of vis-a-vis, again, EPA, CDC, and that those that were not, that were above acceptable levels, there was individual consultation with those property owners in terms of advice on precautions they should take given elevated lead levels in their soil. Had our soil levels come back in an unacceptable way, we would have had a question then to be asking of our Parks Department, and appropriate action and proportional action could have ranged anywhere from public warnings of lead levels to making the parks unavailable. Fortunately, the studies came back and didn't show that those lead levels warranted any additional action. So at this point, I don't anticipate that we'll take any additional action regarding our parks. Beyond that, having seen no evidence from the city perspective that additional response is warranted or necessary, I don't anticipate at this point any particular actions, but again, I haven't talked to the council on that. My understanding is that going forward, NPCA and Gopher continue in a discussion about what the follow-on from this is. I believe they're continuing to monitor the effectiveness of the mitigations that Gopher undertook and that they reported to the public, and that a new compliance plan is an outgrowth by necessity of the current enforcement action, which I believe they're still engaged in. And so as NPCA moves forward in continuing their process of working out that compliance plan with Gopher Resources, that if and or when there's an opportunity for us to weigh in on that or to be informed about that, we'll follow along with that process. But at this point, I'm not anticipating any additional actions on behalf of the city. I don't know if that speaks for you guys or.
I was just gonna
say that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
results coming back from the park soil testing, I hope everybody considers it as good
Yeah.
I mean, for it to be that well below the screening threshold for EPA is good news, and everybody should be considering it that way. And,
Yeah.
and that, I think, those are parks that people are out there playing soccer,
Yeah.
have their dogs out there for decades. So, I mean, it's really a relief to see those come back how they did.
Yeah, and I'll just throw one more comment, and I don't want to steal all of it. And yeah, no, I do agree. And I had 3 soil samples done in my yard. I live in the Burr Oaks neighborhood, and they had good results, so I was good because I have 3 raised bed gardens. And but I still think it's an open question of like we're hearing about, like they've said no level of lead is safe, and we know of 13 days this year where the lead levels were illegal levels and were unsafe, and we were notified about that 3 months later. And I know that's not your responsibility, but it is also something that you can help us with because MPCA is not helping us with it. And so like, I think there's a role maybe the city can help us to, I don't know what
It's not a role that I'm aware of.
Okay, well, I'm just asking, like, how do I engage the counselors? And maybe this is a side question, like to.
If you have a specific action you'd like to see the city undertake, then you might want to suggest that. But in a world of what are you guys going to do, we are at the end of our jurisdiction. We cannot change or enforce the EPA laws. I can just as easily do that as I can release the Epstein files. It is outside of my jurisdiction. If the
you can do monitoring for the city.
If the legislative auditor wants to review what MPCA has done, that is certainly within their prerogative. But I again can't cause that to happen.
Yeah, but the city could do monitors on their own. What is stopping them from doing that?
We don't have we have neither the budget for the technology or the staff competence on staff. The EPA and the NPCA are the ones who have that jurisdiction.
And
it is literally above our head.
I talked with Amanda Jarrett Smith.
We are preempted from enforcement.
Sure. I talked with Amanda Jarrett Smith, who's with the MPCA. She oversees the air quality monitoring. She's very open to more monitors. She said the problem is funding. And she said that typically comes through the legislature, but there's also cases where like Flint Hills, they pay for a monitor. And I think it's from pressure from the community. There's cases where cities pay for a monitor.
Gopher has their own monitors.
And then MPCA can run the monitor. Like, it's just the funding. I'm just wondering, how do I engage with like this process? I know you can't turn around tomorrow.
So if for MPCA it is a funding question, and the state funds the MPCA, then it would be state legislators who you would talk to about funding for MPCA to add additional monitoring.
I think there's an avenue where the Gopher resource could fund it and MPCA runs it, or City of Eagan could fund it.
And that would be, again, the City of Eagan is not in a position to fund it, and I don't anticipate that'll be the case.
But they could be.
The
They fund a lot of
MPCA
stuff.
and Gopher can talk about however they want to do that.
Yeah.
And they can talk to the state legislature about how they want to fund that.
All right, I'll let it open up for other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I'm curious if you're aware of what carbon disulfide is.
I'm not, which is why I don't engage in air quality.
Sure.
monitoring.
Yeah. Well, so Gopher is the top emitter of carbon disulfide, and carbon disulfide is a chemical released into the air. It's one of their emissions. Chronic long-term effects in human include neurological effects, behavioral and neuropsychological changes, reproductive effects, including decreased sperm count and menstrual disturbances. This is according to the EPA. Among some of the other chronic effects are cancer and coronary heart disease. There's acute symptoms as well, like nausea, vomiting, etc. My other question is if you're aware of what 1,3-butadiene is?
Again, same thing.
Okay. So 1,3-butadiene, also according to the EPA website, is acute short-term exposure by inhalation in humans results in irritation of the eyes, nasal long-term exposure increases the incidence of leukemia and tumors of various kinds. Cardiovascular disease, rheumatic, and a word I can't pronounce, heart diseases, respiratory and cardiovascular systems, liver function issues, blood function issues. I heard many stories at the meeting on Wednesday of high incidences of things like asthma and cancer in houses that are immediately kind of adjacent, like the closest houses to Gopher. And I'm feeling really concerned that the area that the city just rezoned as residential is within that same proximity as those kinds of as those closer houses. And I'm just feeling really curious as to how the city could play a role in, and if they intend to educate people before they purchase their homes in that area and live there, of these kind of really chronic health hazard issues.
They are chronic health hazards if they are shown to have consequence and to be a pattern epidemiologically. Thus far, that evidence does not exist, nor has it been presented beyond anecdotally. If MDH sees cause based on things like soil testing in the area, which they report they do not, they would undertake an epidemiological test to evaluate whether or not that high level of soil, of lead in the soil or other contaminants, is leading to consequences like all of the health risks you talked about. At this point, MDH has not conducted any sort of an epidemiological test of the area to identify any sort of health problems or patterns that are endemic to the area because of emissions from Gopher. They have not established any sort of a causal relationship between the two. While granted, there is a potential for that to happen, they have not documented that in an evidence fashion. So again, if MDH takes the soil testing and says there is something amiss here, we need to go to the next level of analysis to get to the bottom of it, then that kind of epidemiological study would be perhaps warranted and appropriate, and MDH would be the appropriate group to undertake that. Thus far, my understanding is that based on the soil testing, MPCA and MDH have concluded that there was a potential public health risk, that they undertook the soil testing to evaluate whether or not that potential was actual, that based on the soil testing, they have not found warrants to assume that there is any sort of a health consequence, so they may not be moving forward on an epidemiological study. That is, as far as I know and what I understand about what the warrant of that is. Granted, all of these elements in our environment have the potential to have any number of impacts. The key question is, how do you react proportionally and how do you react to that potential? If you react to that potential and you say, I should look into it further, which we've done, and you find that there continues to be a problem, then you would go to that next level of asking questions about the health consequences. But again, at this point, the soil testing doesn't seem to warrant that.
I just want to add that these things weren't part of the soil tests. They're gases that are released into the air on a regular basis.
And so they're also probably not germane to this conversation, because this conversation is about lead in the environment, and that's what we focused on. That's what the emission was from MDH. If there are other contaminants in the air that Gopher Resources is putting out, then I would assume that MPCA monitors for those as well. And if and or when they violate those standards, then it's another issue to take out. But that's not the issue we're dealing with today. We're not on a fishing expedition here. We were brought from MPCA the suggestion that there was an unacceptable level of lead emitted for a temporary period. We were told that temporary level was reduced to an acceptable level, and that it was no longer there. At this point, it doesn't seem reasonable to call open open season on every potential threat or risk when there's no data to back it up and to suggest action.
I just want to add one more thing, sir. The MPCA told us on Wednesday that they do not monitor for these gases. They're not part of the regulation at this point in time. They were recently given the jurisdiction to do so, but will not have this kind of set up until May. And I also just would like to share that at least 4 or 5 houses that are the closest to Gopher have cases of cancer. And I just think it is worth noting that does feel like cause of concern. And I just wonder, it just feels like the reason that people aren't exploring it is because there aren't adequate studies done on our neighborhoods to prove it, but nobody's doing the studies to show that there could be actually harm in living close to Gopher. And so it's just it just feels like we need help.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question? Please. So the 2 gas stations that you just mentioned, so they're not being monitored right now by NPCA.
No.
So how are they part of this discussion?
Well,
I mean, do we know that that's coming out of Gopher? If there's no monitor that's picking them up, why is that part of this discussion?
That's a good question, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're monitored, but they're not regulated. Maybe that's the difference. Because it came from MPCA
We can
data, so
send
that must be.
more-
I can send that to you.
Yeah, because someone else from our group had done some research, and it was coming from another database. But yeah,
Yeah,
we can
I can
send
send
some
it
more
to you.
information on that.
So I have 2 points. One is when they are emitting high levels of lead, what's more concerning to me is the immediate breathing of that into your body. Right now, my granddaughter's playing soccer at Special Fields. So I hope that the emissions are just great today. But because it's a 3-month rolling average, all high points are just smoothed over. So on any one day, you can have an excessive amount of lead coming off. And if she's playing soccer on that day, that would be a horrible day to be doing that. And it can happen multiple times throughout a 3-month cycle and still be all smoothed out and not cause any signal to MPCA that they are above any threshold. So on any one given day, you could be down here and then suddenly have a spike and be down here and have spikes, and it would never be seen.
I think, so first off, the lead levels at Thresher Field were well below normal. My understanding is that those soil levels do not degrade. Okay, so what is there is there. It's not like your body processing out in terms of blood. Okay?
But this is based on modeling.
If you can. You're starting to get into what I would suggest is a highly speculative set of potentials that I don't know how realistic that kind of a pattern
At the
is.
meeting, there was noted 2 days in, I forget which year, October of 2022 maybe. One was a 70-pound release of lead, and then just a few days later, there was 17 pounds released.
I don't know what that means. At the end of the day, it's like, that's an interesting number, but in terms of what the consequence of it was, or what the consequence of that is, or the likelihood of single-day spikes like this, I have no context to put that in. The notion that it spikes one day and comes down doesn't seem to me to jive with the 3-month period where they could show that consistently over the leading up months and the coming away months, that there were spikes, but that the pattern was generally up, then it was elevated, and then it came down. There were spikes day to day,
Yeah.
but when you amortize it, there is very clearly a over time, over here, and then back down. The only way we have to analyze it is on that kind of average piece. That I don't know what the consequence of a daily spike and then a spike down is. I can't quantify that, I can't.
But you can
do anything beyond
understand
that.
mathematically how that smooths out there.
I can understand how it is mathematically or at least narratively possible. Whether I know that that works in the metaphysical world, consistent with the narrative, I don't have that. We can tease out all sorts of what if this or what if that. There's no way to respond to that. If there was a massive release and after 3 days, a gopher and or NPCA recognized there was a huge spike on one day, I would imagine they would probably respond to that proportionally and suggest, for example, that if there was a clear and present danger, there was a clear and present danger. What I do know is that January through March, your daughter probably wasn't playing soccer on those fields, and might have been walking the dog out in Thresher Park or playing on the playground in Burr Oaks. But again, I don't know what the consequence of that would be. And again, the gopher is, as far as I understand, back in compliance with those federal standards. And I don't see any indication that the temporary spike is necessarily a likelihood. Is it a possibility? Sure. Everything's a possibility. But we're trying to deal in what's likely and what do we know. And what we know is that monitoring worked. NPCA picked up, and Gopher Resources picked up that they were emitting lead. They looked into what the cause of that was. They mitigated the cause of that. They're in the process of continuing to monitor whether or not that mitigation continues to keep them in compliance and at acceptable levels in terms of emissions.
It didn't work for us.
That's what we know.
We didn't know until 3 months later. So we
I
didn't.
understand that, but
It worked for
there's nothing-
penalizing them. Yeah, but that exists. The technology exists for real-time monitoring. So
And again,
we're just saying we want help. We're saying MPCA is not doing enough, and we're just asking, like, can the city of Eagan help us?
no.
No,
legislators
that's all right.
I mean,
Wow.
no realistic. If the MPCA isn't responsive to you, then it's your state legislators that you should be talking to and saying it to them.
Yeah.
I can't make MPCA be any more responsive to me.
You can try to help
You
the
can.
citizens of Eagan, though. Like,
Well, and
You
we
can
have.
listen to us. You can listen to that meeting.
We have pushed the information out as much as we can. What I'm suggesting is we are at the end of our jurisdiction in this area. If you have specific things to ask, can you do X or Y or Z? We can respond and say, yes, we can, or no, we can't. But I'm not going to sit here and tease out a whole bunch of possible scenarios that may or may not happen or may or may not be likely based on the evidence that we have. You know, that seems to me to be disproportionate and alarmist. Back here.
Yeah, I'm talking back to '92 when we built. You guys never disclosed that there was batteries buried back there, nothing. That was behind us. That's the city's job to notify.
I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the case.
You don't think that's the case, to notify the people that are moving into this new residential area?
We don't have notification responsibilities, nor do I accept the notion that we had knowledge of that or responsibility to do that.
You had knowledge of it because there was tests done in '92 before we built.
I didn't even live in Minnesota until I'm sorry, I didn't live in Eagan until
it's not like you.
1995.
It's about the
It
city.
doesn't matter if you live here.
So I'm saying I don't accept. You're suggesting the city had knowledge of it. I don't know of that.
It's documented.
Again,
Okay, I just want to be on record, about this development you're putting in. You're making a grave mistake. There's 4 houses that have cancer, the 4 closest houses, and I'm one of them. And, same with that Thresher field.
Yeah, and
I want to be on record, that is a big mistake.
let me address that housing development. That housing development was approved in December of 2024, before NPCA had breathed a word to the city of Eagan, which came in June, about the emissions between January and March. So these emissions post-dated that development.
They've had
At the
so
time,
many violations.
I'm sorry, sir. at the time of the approval of the development, we had no evidence of this episode and no evidence of long-term damage to the environment or inappropriateness of approving residential. I'll note that all of the houses that you all live in were approved for development and built after the Gopher plant was in place in 1948. Whether or not that is a big mistake or not, it is what it is. It has been the case for the last 80 years. What we're in the business of is understanding whether or not Gopher Resources is compliant with emission law or not, and how they get back into compliance with emission law. That law is set above our heads by the EPA and enforced by the NPCA. At this point, there is no evidence that the area is not safe for residential living. I understand that you might have fears that it's not, and you need to act on those fears as you see most appropriate. But from a public policy perspective, there is no data or evidence that warrants changing our policy or suggests that any of those approvals were inappropriate or somehow ill-advised. You're entitled to your opinion, but that's what it is. I mean, the facts are the facts. I'll go back here and then over here really quickly, but again, we're going out
I had a
here.
bone test, lead test on my bones, and I'm 13.79, and the average is 3.
Right.
So that's coming from that place.
And I would suggest that you take that up with your medical professionals and or your legal.
No, not my medical professionals, it's with the city, it's with Dakota County, and it's with the MPCA, all 3.
I disagree. My NDH's advice would be if you have a bone test that shows high levels, that you take it up with your medical professional, and or if you want to, document it with your attorney.
When you keep
That's as far
talking
as I
about
have
this
to go.
last violation, there's been many violations over the years.
They haven't been violations of emissions. They've been administrative violations. The NPCA reports that up until this incident, that Gopher has been compliant with emission standards for the 11 previous years since 2010 when they put that technology in and attained the new levels at 0.15 parts per whatever measure. Right here, and then we have to get downstairs.
So there was a comment at the Q&A meeting, and someone was citing from a report that the highest lead concentration they believe would be in the intersection of Dodd and Eagan.
Right, I bet within 500 feet, I think, of the plant.
Is that within the jurisdiction of the city to monitor that, clean those streets up when there's a high lead level or?
The high level on the street is no consequence until somebody comes in physical contact with it. So unless people are getting out at the intersection and playing in the dirt and then going to their mouth.
People are walking on the sidewalks.
I understand. and then are they?
They track it back into their house, and
Well,
then
then-
they can. There's all sorts of ways
again-
you can get in their house and then ingest it.
Again, MDH's suggestions when you identify lead is to reduce exposure to lead. So, for example, don't wear your shoes in the house if there's a high level of lead in your yard. Don't, for example, the 2 most vulnerable populations to lead in soil are children and pregnant women, I believe. I think on the video call, MDH staff specifically addressed the precautions you can take to reduce your exposure to lead, and they talk specifically about people who tend to exhibit high hand and mouth or other part behavior. So eliminating physical contact with the lead and moving that away is a reasonable and proportional response. Being concerned about a vehicle driving through the intersection does not seem to be proportional and reasonable. And the business owners in the area also had the same opportunity to test their soils and advise their employees on that. So, I mean, again, beyond that, yes, that's within the city's purview. I mean, it's an intersection of 2 county roads, and a state road, so it's not entirely our jurisdiction. But again, there's not a readily available precaution that is warranted simply by the presence of lead. Is there precaution to take? Yes. If your property is one that tested high in lead soil content, I might suggest you don't garden. But again, MDH is the one who would have called you and said, this is your high soil testing level. We'd suggest you take the following precautions to deal with that. I think that we in the city have investigated, evaluated whether or not there are reasonable and appropriate and warranted precautions to be taken in our parks area. We've determined that there isn't. If you have a different opinion, you're free to that. But again, what's the data say? And if there is cancer being caused by that plant, then document it. Back it up. Show MDH that there's a pattern here. And if MDH won't listen to you, show a lawyer. There's a pattern here. But at the end of the day, we can't, as a city, build the legal case or build the epidemiological case or the case study. That is all on other folks. And we also can't sit and respond to every potential and say, well, there's a potential threat over here, so we have to respond over here and everybody move over here. Again, I feel bad that there is cancer in those 4 houses. I lived in the Borough Oaks neighborhood. I had cancer. It's not necessarily associated with the lead. We can speculate that it is, and I mean, that's a believable narrative, but until the evidence is there to suggest it, we can't act on it. We can't just act in every direction where there's something potential. So we have to get downstairs for a 6:30 meeting. We can keep doing this in listening sessions and going through these same circles, but again, the city is not responsible for Gopher Resources emitting lead into the air. The city gave them entitlements in 1948, and they actually probably predated entitlements. The city can't go back and take back those entitlements. We'd be opening up to litigation. NPCA is a regulatory force. Whether or not Gopher Resources is able to continue operating there is really up to whether or not they continue to award the permit. And they award the permit and pull the permit based on their compliance record. So far, Gopher Resources has demonstrated to NPCA that they are back in compliance. They've accepted that they were out of compliance. They are working with NPCA on the enforcement mechanism. And until NPCA suggests that they are so out of compliance that the permit should be pulled, there's not a lot we can do to affect those operations. It's NPCA and the state of Minnesota.
When they first started, they were not doing 50,000 batteries a day.
Again,
8 years ago.
I cannot regulate them any more than I can Comcast. And we have all sorts of issues with how Comcast does business, and I understand them, but their business model is not part of what we do in the city.
No, but you gave them the right to expand. You let them buy more land and expand.
And they have the permit from NPCA, which allows them to operate. We rule over land use. That's it. That's it. And they have an entitlement. Just like you have an entitlement to have a house on your property that we can't go back and claw back and pull down.
We will keep coming to these listening sessions until you can show us that you're going to try to help us.
Well, I mean, then, in the interest of being more productive, then I might suggest if you have something specific to ask that we can do,
Yeah.
then suggest what that is, and we can talk about how that is. But
Yeah.
this is, in my mind, quite frankly, the way this has gone on for 3 weeks is utterly unproductive and circular.
Well, I said at the beginning, I sent you an email, and you said, "Oh, what email?" So if you respond back to my emails,
I did
I
not.
sent it on Friday. So I'll just need to figure out the way to communicate the ideas that I have, and other people will have
Yeah.
other ideas too.
That's fine. I checked my email. I have not seen an email come in.
I'll connect with this.
Yeah.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I didn't say I didn't look at it. I said I didn't get it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Mike.